Hello, and welcome back to the Y Comics Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse, and with me today is a DC Comics columnist and trivia lord, Alex Jaffe. Hello, Alex.
Hey, thanks for inviting me on, Jesse.
Thanks for coming on. When I saw someone that I don't know if we both follow, I don't know if you know Ty, that is editor in chief at Uppercut. Like I saw that they retweeted your tweet, but hey, I'm a columnist at DC and I want to be on your podcast. I'm like, this is a podcast for columnists at DC. This is perfect.
I'm right where I'm supposed to be then.
Yeah. So we haven't talked a ton, so I'm really curious about your history with comics. Where did you start reading, and how did you find them?
When I was 3 years old, my dad gave me he was giving me all the reading material he could so I could learn how to read on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And he got this Shazam Treasury edition from his dad when he was a kid, when my grandfather ran a drugstore. And like most drugstores in the early 70s, they had a comic book rack. So my grandpa Sam, he gave my dad this comic, and he held on to it for like everything he does because he's kind of a pack rat, and he gave it to me, and that was basically the first thing I ever read on my own. And I must have read that one issue of this Treasury reprint of old Fawcett era Shazam stories over and over again, and that's kind of how I became enamored with comics. And a couple of years after that, I fell into Batman the animated series and all the Bruce Timm and Paul Dini stuff, and that kind of swept me into the DC universe further. Justice League Unlimited really opened my eyes to the whole universe, which I followed into 52, which was the maxi series running at the time. And
Yeah.
since then, I've basically been following all the tendrils of DC continuity wherever they go. And that kind of led me to the position I'm at DC right now, where I take people's questions about the breadth and depth of the DC universe and do my research to find answers for them.
And see, that's one of those jobs. Like as a teenager, and when I was in college, I was like, that's the job. I know so much about DC Comics. I would like to just write about my knowledge of DC Comics.
Yeah,
And then,
it's a job that shouldn't exist because it's a job everyone like. It feels like, what if my job was eating ice cream all day?
Yeah.
It's something I kind of lucked into, and I'm very grateful for having the position. And it's something I consider a great privilege. I could get into how I fell into that role, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that in a second. It's one of those things too, though. I think people might hear that as your job description, like, it's an easy job. You can just talk about superheroes all day. As someone who's tried many a time to write out like a paragraph about like facts about a superhero and stuff and struggle through that, I know for a fact that cannot be always the easiest job.
It's tough. Sometimes just answering one question literally takes months of research. Like the other day, somebody asked me, how many times has Superman gone back in time to Krypton before it exploded? And I had to go through every appearance of Krypton in any comic. And a month later, I came up with the answer 14. And just that 2-digit figure represents like 28 straight days of work.
Yeah, I'm glad no one's asked you the question of how many times has Batman punched someone in the chin, because like,
people have asked me questions like that. I just don't answer them.
I was about to say, like, that's more than 1,000 Detective Comics issues.
Sure,
it's about 1 million issues at this point.
Yeah, sometimes I'll say I'll be happy to answer that if you give me $20,000.
If you could pay my salary for 5 years while I read every single Batman appearance.
Exactly. It's not that I'm not willing to do it. It's that I don't have the time to do it.
Yeah. I've been trying to use the DC Infinite app and go through all those old Batman books.
Oh, what a resource.
I was trying to read all the old Batman detectives because like Batman has been my favorite character since I was not even one. Like I've talked about it on the show before, but my parents took me to see Batman Forever when I was not even 6 months old. So like that's my first comic book experience. Like my parents always joke my third word was Batman. So being able to experience that through the Infinite app is just wonderful. So knowing that that's your job, is to just read the old books and try to answer these really puzzling questions, is so fascinating.
It's one part of my job. It's there are other parts of it. I write regular articles about whatever DC's trying to promote. I run a trivia competition in the DC community boards every week, which I'm hoping to talk about more at some point, maybe near the end of the show.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to talk about that.
All right.
Yeah.
But yeah, it all grew out of, the DC Infinite app. It started as DC Universe in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this message board component, and there still is. And all of these new people were getting their hands on this vast archive of DC comics that they'd never had before. So I know that getting into the deep end of comics can be very confusing and overwhelming. So I decided to make myself available on those boards in the early days of it. Just if anyone has any questions about comic history, I could help them get to the bottom of it. And the moderators at the time kind of saw what I was doing and were like, and they kind of pulled me and said like, hey, do you want to do this like professionally? And that's the only time that has literally ever worked in the history of comics. So I wouldn't recommend trying that path.
Just someone completely pestering is like, here's my pitch ideas for this character and this character.
Exactly.
It's like, hey, we're going to just delete your account because you're spamming people.
No, they do not. The thing about DC I see over and over again is that if you want a job with them, you don't go to them, they come to you.
Exactly. Yeah. That's all the stories I hear too, is like, and whenever a writer and artist goes to DC, it's always an editor going like, hey, I think this is going to work if we can secure them somehow.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to get their attention.
So I want to talk to you mostly though about that Treasury edition that you first read as your first comic.
Okay.
I went through and read it myself real fast before we talked yesterday, and it's one of those amazing things that you don't see anymore, those kind of Treasury editions.
Not so much, no.
It has not even just the reprints, but it has like mind puzzles, it has coloring pictures, it has gags, like
it has a biography of C.C. Beck in the back.
Yeah, it has basically anything a kid needs for like a 3-hour road trip.
Yeah. It's an activity book of a thing. Yeah. And the stories inside are so varied. And I think that's what really struck me about it. That like it was such a seminal text to me about how comics could really be anything. They could be these sci-fi epics, they could be light fantasy, they could be talking animals, they could be crooked criminals, they could be about girls. A girl could be the main character, which was revolutionary for me at 3. It's really an amazing artifact. And there's one scene. How do you want to do this? You want to go through the stories one by one, or
we can go through the stories one by one. That's totally fine. All right. With
me. So there's this one scene that was laser etched onto my brain in the first story, Savannah's Time Trap, which originally ran in Captain Marvel Adventures number 121 in 1951. But I read it in 1992. So on like the second page, Savannah is in his jail cell, and he has an idea for how to defeat Captain Marvel, as he was going by at the time. And it goes on to explain that Savannah could really walk out of jail anytime he wants, but he doesn't bother because he knows that Captain Marvel will throw him back in. So when he comes up with an idea for how to beat Captain Marvel, we see how he escapes jail. What he does is he recites a math formula, and that allows him to just walk through walls. Like, that's how math works.
Yeah.
And at 3 years old, I was like, I don't know a lot about math, but that can't be right, can it? Can you know so much about math that you're able to phase through a wall? And it was just like one of these brain teasers to me that just like, well, it's impossible, but he's doing it as if it were possible, and we're supposed to take his word for it. And that's something we see throughout the comic. Like the first time I see a Talkie Tawny story, like, oh, Captain Marvel just hangs out with a bipedal talking tiger and he goes around like nobody has a problem with this. Okay, it's just a part of the world and you kind of have to accept it. And it's like, to me, the most comic booky moment, like the quintessential comic booky Silver Age sci-fi, that science could basically be whatever you want it to be. Cut to 2019.
Mhm.
How many years later is that? A bunch of years later. 23 years later or something. I'm watching Shazam for the first time on the Warner Brothers slot. And it gets to that post-credit scene. Have you seen Shazam?
Yes, I've seen Shazam.
2019 film?
Yeah.
There's this scene at the end. I watched through the movie. I quite enjoyed most of it. I thought the abandoning Billy at a carnival scene was a little overwrought, but most of it I really enjoyed. But then we get to that scene in the post-credits where you see Dr. Savannah in his jail cell, and it took my breath away. It felt like the only thing in the theater was me and that screen. Like it was a direct conversation between me and the filmmakers, because all you see is Savannah scribbling this arcane formula on a wall over and over and over again, trying to break through that wall.
Yeah.
And my mouth dropped open. It's like, my God, this is the first comic book I've ever read. And I felt like that scene was literally just for me. And I had never felt like more attached to comic books as a whole than I was at that moment.
You know, what's funny is I had a similar feeling while watching that movie, but it was when they're trying to escape the Rock of Eternity, and they're opening all the doors, and they open up the door to I believe is it the Beast Kingdom is what they call it now. I'm not sure what Jeff Johnson's changed it to, but the place where all the animals are, where Tawny Tiger comes from and stuff. Yeah. And it's the alligators playing cards, and I'm like, this is Captain Marvel. This is the goofiness of Captain Marvel.
The little there's a lot of neat little touches in that movie, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of that in the next one. But we see Savannah here, the quintessential mad scientist. Fun fact about Dr. Savannah. You know the phrase "curses foiled again"?
Is that invented with him?
That he invented that phrase. The first time you hear "curses foiled again" in pop culture is Dr. Savannah. So he's literally the quintessential, like, hand-wringing mad scientist supervillain, even more so than Lex Luthor, who didn't really become that until a little later in his evolution.
There's something about like CC Beck's like original Captain Marvel comics that have such a flavor of comic books that you don't get really anymore. Even like Archie was kind of the last one to have it. Oh yeah. And with the reboot, you lost it with that. I mean, there's still the digest, but you lost the single issue formula with that. And there's never been anybody to really recapture that except for Jeff Smith in that one Shazam versus Monster
Society of Evil.
Yeah, like that's the last time I felt that era kind of captured. And I guess it's really with Jeff Smith in general. Like he captures that era very well.
What's underrated, I would say, is Billy Batson and the Magic of Shazam. Have you ever read that?
I have not, no.
It was Mike Kunkel, I believe, Art Baltazar, Franco Arlani, a series that ran from 2008 to 2010. And it really captures kind of the spirit of old Shazam comics for a new kid audience. And if you're looking for a more recent take on that feeling, it's a little bit of a spiritual sequel to Monster Society of Evil. So
that's a good thing to write.
I would recommend that.
As a 3-year-old, how did you feel watching the Wizard Shazam get crushed by a giant block of rubble?
Oh, well, you see his ghost in the next panel, so it's totally okay. Oh, if you die, you just lose your body. That's not really a big deal. He's still around. I mean, if you're just like, that's a lesson I learned kind of from Star Wars, that like, if you die, but you're just like still kind of hanging around everyone you know as a ghost, then does death really mean anything?
Yeah, it is one of those things too where it's so dramatic for the sake of being dramatic. Right. It's like, I give you this power, and all of a sudden, boom, I'm dead.
Right.
It's very, and I wonder like how much Star Wars, we know, like takes a lot from serials and such, but that scene where Obi-Wan's like, hey Luke, I've taught you everything you need to know, now watch me disappear.
Exactly.
Like that is such a comic book thing to do.
Mm-hmm. It's very Jarrell in the Fortress of Solitude.
Yeah, exactly. Um, my favorite story out of the Treasury was the criminal who swaps clothes with
Oh yes,
Captain
that last
Marvel.
story. I loved that story as a kid because
I
there's
love the
kind
idea.
of a
Yeah,
there's kind of a theme throughout all of the stories in this that like you shouldn't necessarily trust grown-ups.
yeah.
And that's something I really empathized with as a kid. And it's like, yeah, Billy gets it. He's one of us.
The two things about that really stood out to me is one, there's a guy that looks exactly like Captain Marvel just hanging out in the universe.
Sure. Fred McMurray.
Yeah, and just no one questions it. And the second is that Billy Batson has a secretary. I never knew that until I read this. Like he had a secretary that knew who he was, and he's like,
Yeah.
he's a 10-year-old. Like, how's he paying her?
He's a very advanced. The station is paying her, obviously.
Okay.
She's working on the radio station salary. It's not like she's his private secretary. Anyway, when I remember watching Powerpuff Girls when it 1st aired. Did you watch the first run of Powerpuff Girls?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. And there's this scene where these 3 criminals dress up as the Powerpuff Girls.
Yeah.
And just commit all these crimes under their names. And it's obvious that it's not them. But the whole time I was watching it, I think I was the only person to be like, they took this story from Captain Marvel.
Yeah, it is very much that.
Yeah.
Is that story. And then, like, now that you mentioned, Powerpuff Girls is this serialized version of those comics. It's what those old Superman serials and Batman serials
were. It was that level of superheroism for that generation. The same way, I guess Teen Titans Go fills that role now.
Yeah, or even before that was Batman Brave and the Bold. I feel like fell in that role because it was very like trying to capture Adam West, but also make it a cartoon.
Yeah. Love that cartoon.
Yeah, I always think about my favorite thing I always tell people is like, just watch the final episode. You don't have to watch any other episode. Just watch the final episode.
Oh, I never tell anyone that because they have to earn that final episode. You don't appreciate that final episode until you've seen some Brave and the Bold.
I just love the idea of Batmite trying to cancel the show. And
yeah,
at the
it's
end,
great.
They strike the set because of the show's ending.
But my argument is that's so good that once you see it, there's no reason to go back and watch the rest of the show. And the rest of the show is so good.
It's very good. I mean, what other show you're going to get the Phantom Stranger and the Spirit, both voiced by Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill, respectively, fighting against
Adam
Bruce's...
West is Thomas Wayne, Julie Newmar is Martha.
And you're fighting for the sake of Bruce Wayne. It show's better than it had any credit to be because no one was really watching it, but I was.
Oh, if you want to talk about good Batman shows nobody ever watched, we got to talk about Beware the Batman.
Yes, let's talk about Beware the Batman. I know that we were going to talk about the Captain Marvel stories, but we could talk about everything DC because they never get to
I don't mind. I just rewatched that show recently. There's a show that was just real solid work that was buried under some poor marketing.
Yeah, the whole action line during that time kind of got screwed over.
Kind of the coolest action Batman we've seen. Anyway,
and
back to Captain Marvel.
You got cool Katana in that. You got hulked out Alfred that had like a Tommy gun, I think, or something like that.
That Alfred took a while for me to grow on, but he won me over by the end.
And I love that it was like a continuous narrative of Ra's al Ghul kind of trying to rise from the dead, but they were playing it very slowly. And Anarchy being the bad guy, cool design of it.
It was a great slow burn show. You can watch that on HBO Max.
And the Green Lantern show, which also
great, sure.
Having those very good hints of Black Lanterns and
neither
stuff.
Of those shows have Captain Marvel in them.
Sadly, they don't. And that's honestly my thing is like, why haven't we seen a Captain Marvel cartoon?
I know it feels like a natural fit. There should have been a Captain. Well, there was one, the Kid Super Power Hour and the Power of Shazam in the 70s.
Yeah, I'm thinking just like modern, especially like with
Yeah.
the sense of like how the modern cartooning sensibility has kind of come back into vogue
Yeah.
with like the modern Looney Tunes and now like Jellystone and stuff like that. Like
Sure.
modern cartoons are taking a page out of older cartoons now. I'm like, this is the perfect opportunity, DC. Strike the hammer. Get
Like
us to Shazam.
Zach Callison from Steven Universe voiced Shazam in some stuff through
Mm-hmm.
the 2010s, and it's like that could have been DC's Steven Universe.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like a missed opportunity, but you know these characters are going to be around forever, and I
Yep.
feel like it's only
Yeah.
a matter of time before we loop back around to a good Captain Marvel show.
Yeah. Going back to the Cat Marvel comics.
Yeah.
I love that the history of Cat Marvel too is like he's very innovative in so many ways. Not only did he give Superman a run for his money and won for a bit,
Mm-hmm.
he was the first comic book character to have like a rogues gallery that was connected and try to destroy him together.
Yeah, the
Like
Monster
before
Society.
Spider-Man got there with the Sinister Six, it was
Mm-hmm.
they had like years of the storyline to get to that final act, and it's so fascinating that no one talks about Captain Marvel having
I know. And it's because DC was so effective in just wiping him off the map for so many decades. Just sued Fawcett into oblivion, and just all of that history was kind of lost for a while. But it's neat to see people discovering it again in every generation, and it's something I wish got some more exposure because there's some stuff in Captain Marvel's history that's even more fascinating than Superman.
Yeah, it was on DC Infinite when they had all the streaming videos. I do not know if it's on HBO Max currently, but DC does have a Captain Marvel Shazam documentary. I think it might be on the YouTube channel now.
Yeah, I think it's on the
Um,
YouTube channel now.
it's only like an hour long. It's very, very fascinating. It's highly entertaining.
Yeah.
It's really good. And my question for you is like, how do you feel about the state of Captain Marvel currently, or Shazam currently? I guess we should say.
I feel like it could be better.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of potential in the character that isn't being used, and the way it's currently being used is not a way that a lot of Captain Marvel fans really connect with.
Mm-hmm.
It's a totally different take that might be getting its own audience. I'm trying to be as diplomatic as possible
Oh
here.
yeah, for sure. I get that.
But it's not. But people I know who have followed the history of Captain Marvel, it's not one they're necessarily connecting with. But who knows? It might all be trending towards a better place. I can only keep up hope.
Yeah, that's my hope too. I think my biggest issue with current Cap Marvel is just Billy's characterization in general,
Yeah.
and the idea that you can't have a perfect boy be a hero because there's no drama there, or I don't know what the sense of it was to make Billy Batson kind of like a rebel kid, but the idea that he couldn't be a good kid for some reason.
That he has to be kind of a Bart Simpson to be interesting, but that's
yeah,
really not
like
the case.
yeah, like a good heart, but like
Yeah.
a rough exterior. I don't know why that had to be the case, because I think the great thing about Captain Marvel is he was able to pull the drama from Billy being so good,
Mm-hmm.
and like Billy having to make really hard decisions that would hurt somebody, and him struggling over those things.
Absolutely.
Or his family around him, because his family around him wasn't perfect. So Billy now having to play politics with his family and stuff like that. There's so much you can pull from there, because in a way, like being so good makes him an outcast more than anything.
And you see a lot of that in the 90s Power of Shazam series with Jerry Ordway, which I would also recommend to people looking into Captain Marvel. Yeah, he's a really fascinating character because unlike Superman, he's kind of Superman and Robin rolled into one.
Yeah,
And
for
that
sure.
he was designed for the reader to empathize with, but is also granted this power fantasy and shown what you a kid could do with these powers if you were the kind of person who could earn them. Like Billy got these powers because he was worthy of the station, and it's a purely aspirational figure in a way that a lot of other heroes aren't.
And it leads up to very interesting things with the family, because what was the series where Freddie became Shazam.
Trials of Shazam.
Trials of Shazam. Yeah.
By Judd Winnick.
And I think about that series and just the era of Freddy being Shazam, where I think that's where you can get the Shazam that isn't not a perfect human, but like a struggling human, because
exactly
Freddy
you can have it all.
Yeah, because the family's there to be the different aspects of humanity in a way. Because I know, especially with the full extended family like they have now, it's like each one of them has a specific like characteristic from Shazam's powers that they are good at.
Yeah.
And I think you can mirror that into personalities with them having different aspects of Billy that they're more of. And the rest are kind of falling apart, and Billy has to balance it all.
Even in the Golden Age Fawcett comics, Cap Jr., Freddy, is the one who you always see on covers getting into scrapes and punching Nazis and just getting into more action-oriented adventures than Billy does. And he's from the start shown to be the more confrontational member of the Marvel family. So it's not like this is coming out of nowhere. It's something that's always kind of been baked into it.
And I want to ask you a question: is how do you feel about Tawny Tiger, and is it the best sidekick a superhero can ever have?
Tawny is great because again, when I read this comic for the first time when I was 3 years old, it was a thing that I was not expecting to be in a comic book at all. Like I had just seen all these stories. It's like the 4th or 5th story in the book. And I had just seen all these stories about Captain Marvel dealing with these human problems. And there was nary a talking animal in sight. And then suddenly here this guy is talking to Billy, like they're old friends and know each other this whole time. And it's just, this is just a part of this universe. And it just shows how fantastical Captain Marvel's world was allowed to get compared to the kind of more subdued superhero settings that we see in Marvel comics or even most DC comics, where it's the real world except X, where just everything in Captain Marvel's world was kind of strange, and you had to, and anything could happen, and it was just, it instantly presented an endless world of possibility. So Tawny, I would say, is a big key to what makes Captain Marvel of that era really interesting.
And I think my favorite scene in that section of the comic is Tawny Tiger punches the dude out, and Captain Marvel just goes, "Wow, that tiger really knocked that guy out." Like, not even phase that it's a tiger. Really, he's more phased that the tiger could knock the dude out.
Right. Man, what a weird comic. Yeah. Like, I'm kind of embarrassed about the fact that I don't have a personality. So I'm going to drink these vials that will give me different, like, stereotypical personalities. It's just such a wild idea for a comic book. And so just like not anything you would see in a modern comic book story, because it would be seen as like too childish or too strange. And these early comics, they had permission to go in whatever direction they wanted. And that's a kind of freedom that I miss.
Yeah, it's one of those things too where you're going to have a worm with a talk box.
Yeah. And he's like ultimate the greatest villain.
Yeah. He's the smartest man in the entire, or smartest creature in the entire world, and will take the most powerful godlike man down to his knees because he's just smarter.
And for a certain little nerd, that was a fantasy too.
Yeah,
that like you might not be the strongest kid in your school, but just like pure intellect could overcome people. And I feel like a lot of young comic book readers connected with that.
Yeah, it is a really big bummer that, like, since he was buried for a long time, that he didn't get the opportunity to become the Archie of DC Comics, the serialized pocket comic that kids can pick. Like, when I was a kid, like, I got some comics when I found them, but more than anything, when we were at the grocery store, my mom was like, "Hey, do you want something?" I'm like, "Hey, can I buy this Archie?" It's like $2, and it's like 300 pages.
I was a big Jughead guy.
Yeah, yeah. It was whatever's on the shelf. Sometimes I got Betty and Veronica because that's all they had.
Sure.
But that was so much easier than trying to go find a comic book shop in a small town and buy only like a 20-page comic for $3 or something like that. And to think that Captain America, or not Captain America, Captain Marvel could have been that with all these characters and all these wonderful creatures and introduce so many kids to superhero comics
That
because
would
they
have
just
been a
saw it in
very
the grocery
interesting
store.
direction for him. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a bummer. And like as you said, these characters are eternal. Like who knows? Maybe one day they'll like, "Hey, that's a great idea.
Right.
We listened to the podcast you're on. It was a great idea. We'll
Things
do
could
it."
always loop back around.
Yeah, yeah. I would love that. I would really love that. So honestly, I want to talk about that trivia that you're now hosting.
Well,
Yeah.
in the DC community, community.dcuniverseinfinite.com, there is a weekly competition that I curate and write and host every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, where the topics can be as varied as in the past few weeks we did the Suicide Squad, we did the 1989 Batman movie, we did all the Lego DC toys and games and films. Every week the topic changes, and people compete to see who can answer the most questions uh, first, and we give out some prizes when we can, and it's just a really rollicking good time. And I'd love to see more people there.
I haven't. I really should be on those forums more.
It's a great community. It's like the most positive comic book community I've ever been a part of.
It's one of those things too, where like DC has such an obscure history that I feel like more people love to talk about obscure DC history than people like to talk about obscure Marvel history, at least in my circles that I'm a part of. Like anybody talking about Marvel stuff is usually talking about current Marvel stuff. They're never really going real deep with it. But if I run into someone talking about DC, they're like, "Hey, now let me tell you about this Green Lantern that was a chip. He was like a chipmunk. He was he was from a way up. He got ran over by a yellow truck. That's how he died. Like,
let me tell you about Charlie Vicker, the TV actor who played Green Lantern on television and was accidentally drafted as a Green Lantern. Like, it's just there's so much weird stuff in DC history that nobody really talks about. And I think that's because Marvel was always kind of envisioned as a cohesive universe with like every character visiting the character next door. Like crossovers are kind of de rigueur. Everyone constantly exists in the same space. Whereas DC is kind of a mosaic where, yes, there is crossover, but everyone also maintains their own feeling, their own corner of the world. Like, of course, Superman could come by and solve any problem Batman has in a second, but Batman just kind of exists in his own world while also coexisting with the Justice League. And it's that kind of like semi-permeability of the DC universe that allows for a lot more variety of flavor than I would say the Marvel universe does.
And I think there's something else to say about how legacy works at both companies where like as far as I really know, the only current Marvel character that really is so old is Captain America, where most of the stuff that's current now it was either made by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and Steve Ditko and the crew during that era.
Yeah.
While DC they brought a lot of characters back from the era of Captain America, where Green Lantern, Flash, like the original Earth 2 characters, they got transformed, but those Earth 2 characters stayed around too.
They're still around.
So you have all of that further history that's really wild and weird because there was nobody telling them not to do anything.
Exactly. We were making the rules up as we went along.
So people talk about that more because they have more to play with that. When you're talking about Fantastic Four starts off as a very serious comic basically, and same thing with Spider-Man, and same thing with the Hulk and Iron Man and all those others except Captain America. I went back and read a bunch of old Captain Americas that were on Marvel Unlimited, and those stories are really goofy, but as soon as you hit the Avengers era, Cap, it's very serious again. It's very, very fascinating.
Absolutely.
So I have a few questions for you before we wrap up to the end.
Sure.
My first question for you, and I cannot wait to hear your answer for this one, is for you, who is the most underrated DC Comics character that you think hasn't had their time to shine yet?
People have asked me this question in the past, And I have the same answer every time I'm asked it. I would say the most underrated DC character who has not had the time to shine is the Human Bomb, a member of Uncle Sam and the Freedom Fighters. Are you familiar with the Human Bomb?
I am familiar with the Human Bomb. Once you said Uncle Sam and the Freedom Fighters, I'm like, I have the picture of the
Yes.
character now.
The Human Bomb is a character who really wants to be a hero. He really wants to fight for America's freedom and all that's good and just. But his only power is to explode.
Yeah.
All he can do is create massive amounts of uncontrolled damage. And he wants to be a hero. And just the tragedy of that is like, where's the 12-issue Tom King series?
Yeah, where's that
where's the Human Bomb story? I really loved how he was used in Grant Morrison's Multiversity. I thought Justin Gray and Jimmy Palmiotti did an interesting Human Bomb miniseries in like 2012. But other than that, you don't see a lot of cool Human Bomb content. So if there's one character who I think really needs like a star class treatment, Human Bomb's waiting for you.
Human Bomb is one of those characters that DC after Flashpoint was like, you know what? We don't feel like reintroducing Uncle Sam and the Freedom Fighters in our new universe. So whenever we need someone to explode and cause a big tragedy, let's just use Captain Atom.
Right.
Like, because I remember
we've got one exploding guy. We don't need.
I remember like Human Bomb was used a lot to cause like tragedy.
Yeah,
and now
like
it's just
Infinite
Captain
Crisis.
Atom. Yeah, exactly. Infinite Crisis, and now it's just Captain Atom's like now Infinite Frontier is like Captain Atom explodes.
Yeah. Thanks, Kingdom Come.
My next question for you, and this is this can be a hot take or not a hot take. It depends on where you're at and everything.
Okay.
But do you care about continuity?
I do. I care about continuity. I think continuity is a really interesting tool for storytelling, one that rewards people for paying attention and for following a story for many years, and one that allows character growth in a way that most comic books in a cyclical story that kind of tells the same narrative over and over again do not. I think continuity is important, but I think some of the best stories are told outside of continuity. So I think there's room for both. There's room for in continuity comics and out of continuity comics. And that's kind of an interesting way DC's kind of always handled it, of having these main titles and also these side Elseworld self-contained graphic novels, which are great reads that you can appreciate without knowing any other DC stuff. So I think there's room for both of it. I think since one of my most closely held beliefs is that comic books should be and can be for everyone. There's something out there on the shelves for every single type of fan. And if there's not, then it should come across soon. And yeah, I think continuity is important, but it's not the only thing that's important.
Yeah, I agree with that. Were you as jazzed as I was when the term hyper time became popular in the comic sphere a few months back, just because of how DC's handling continuity now?
I'm not a big hyper time fan.
Really?
And no, I feel like like I said, there's room for continuity and there's room for outside of continuity. And like once you start making it all one or the other, or just like erasing all the boundaries so that none of it really matters anymore, it kind of all becomes the same kind of gray paste. And I feel like a concept like hyper time is just too much of an effort to kind of have your cake and eat it too.
That's true.
It's just too much of trying to appeal to everybody at once, and instead of making a decision saying, hey, it all kind of matters, and when all of it matters, none of it does.
That's very true. I think I was maybe most excited then because the idea of continuity just being a thing again, like having them referencing like No Man's Land and
right.
There was something else too that they referenced. I was like, that thing. Like that's the thing I've been waiting for.
Yeah, it's nice to see them talk about earlier storylines like they matter. I always appreciate that. But I think hyper time as a concept is a little too broad. They say Mark Waid is going to return to DC next year. He's got a project planned. That's not a scoop or anything. He said
he said that like on a podcast recently.
So like I wouldn't be surprised if we see a big Hyper Time comeback because that's kind of his baby. But we'll see what he does. Maybe he'll get back to Captain Marvel. He's always talked about wanting to do a Captain Marvel story.
I mean, Mark Waid did reboot Archie, so if anybody
can
exactly get that sensibility of old comics. Jim Gordon, red hair or white hair? What do you prefer?
White hair.
Okay. I mean, it's fair. Jim Gordon's old. He should have white hair.
I mean, look at the very first Batman comic, the very first panel of Detective Comics number 27 with Bruce Wayne and Jim Gordon on site. He's got the white hair. Also, I got to say that Joker by James Tynion IV is my favorite DC comic right now. And I really love what they're doing with Gordon right now.
Speaking of Batman comics, who is your favorite Batman artist? Because I know people always struggle to pick an era of Batman artists.
Darwin Cook, R.I.P. Batman Ego is my favorite solo Batman comic. Everything he drew for DC was magical. He made characters look like nobody else drew them, and any character that he drew is my favorite version of that character.
Infinite Frontier might be my favorite Elseworld comic and also my favorite DC animated
movie. Which one?
Sorry. Final
Frontier.
Yeah.
Oh, first, New Frontier.
New Frontier. That's it. It should be Frontier.
I love the New Frontier comic. The movie I liked a little less because it can't really live up to the art.
Oh no! But having it voice acted so well.
But it was very nice. Yes. Yeah. So I guess by technicality, I gotta say that if I can't say him, and I have to pick like a regular Batman artist, then like I don't know, Jim Aparo. Yeah, probably Jim Aparo.
And second to last question, Phantom Stranger or the Spirit? Who do you want to see have a new regular comic again?
Well, the Spirit isn't a DC character. Are you talking about the Spectre?
The Spectre. Gosh, my brain is like I worked a day job before this. So my brain's still functioning very like
got him.
But the Spirit was published through DC for a bit.
That's true. He was, and he was drawn by Darwin Cook. So all comes back around. I would much rather see a Spectre book. I really loved what John Ostrander did with Spectre. I think Phantom Stranger doesn't make a great main character. He's kind of more interesting on the fringes. The less said about that New 52 series, the better. But yeah, I think a Spectre series could be interesting.
If we do get a Spectre series, I hope to God it's written by Ram V because he would
rule.
Yeah, he does the DC horror very well, as we see with Swamp Thing and also Justice League Dark.
Love his Catwoman.
Yeah, Catwoman's great too. Yeah.
Love Many Deaths of Layla Starr.
And I'm very excited for the new book that's coming out on Vault. I don't remember what it's called off the top of my head. I think it's called Photogram. I'm not sure. It's a music comic, and I'm very excited for that. Last question for you, since you are the DC historian in a lot of ways. What is the best place for a new reader to start? Not talking about like them starting somewhere in new comics, but just a section of comics where it's like a good place to kind of spread out.
That's a great question. I always recommend that people dive right into the deep end and just whatever interests them, they continue to follow. If you have a particular character you like, just follow that character, and eventually they'll meet some other characters you might be interested in. What I like to do early in my reading was I just went down the list of Eisner winners and checked those out. That's a good place to start. DC The New Frontier is a great place to start. If you're a fan of the cartoons, the tie-ins like Batman Adventures and Superman Adventures and Gotham Adventures are really, really good. That's a great way to bridge the gap. What's great about DC is that there are so many equally valid places to start. You could just kind of throw a dart. You could just throw a dart in a comic shop and read whatever you pick up, and you'll find something in there that interests you. Like, I mean, I started with a random Shazam collection, which is how we got started talking, and that led me into everything else. There's no wrong answer to this question. The best advice I could give to someone just starting out is don't be afraid. Just jump in.
Alex, thank you for coming on to talk to me about DC just for the last hour. It's been a pleasure to be able to talk about my favorite comics for an hour. I don't get to do it very often.
Why do you think I asked to be invited onto podcasts? I love talking about this stuff.
Where can people find your art, your columns, find your opinions on Twitter, everything like that?
You can find me on dccomics.com under the name Alex Jaffe. That's my name. I come out with a couple articles a week. You can find me at Alex Jaffe on Twitter. I have a podcast about video games called Insert Credit, if you want to check that out. And again, you can go to community.dcuniverseinfinite.com to check out Trivia Tuesday, every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern.
And you can find this show on Twitter at YComicsPod, Facebook at facebook.com/YComicsPodcast. You can email me at ycomicspodcast@gmail.com. If you have a question for our guest, want to be a future guest on the show yourself, or have a story about how comics impacted you that you want read on air, you can reach me at all those places. If you like the show, please leave a review and tell a friend. The logo is done by my friend Andy Manley, who you can see working on The Simpsons. The banners are done by my friend Steven. The theme is Join the Restaurant by David Szesztay. And remember, everybody, even Captain America punched Nazis.